Good morning, everybody. So this morning we've got our long-term plan workshop, and this has been one of a series of many workshops. But today, what the team are going to present and share with you is having a look at our raw data, the impact. So we're taking into account what we've heard from the community pre-engagement, where we'll take you through the FTE requests that have come through from staff as part of the budget preparations, and the methodology that we have used and the risk approach we have used to FTE requests. What we're also going to be bringing forward too is obviously the challenges that we have in terms of legacy, in terms of some inflationary pressures, etc. And in terms of what we're presenting to you today is the raw data. It is not 100% perfect, and what I mean by that is the purpose of today is to share the information with you and get your guidance as governors as to the next steps or the direction of travel you wish us to go with the data that we are presenting to you. And I think that that's really important, and that feeds into the series of workshops that we have coming up in the new year. And whilst the next workshop, I think, is scheduled for the 31st of January, it is highly likely after we've presented today that we may need to put an additional workshop in either the week or 2 weeks before in January, just to make sure we check and monitor that we're progressing with whatever guidance that you give us today. So we think that that's pretty important. Just to be clear too, the information that we're presenting today will, at this moment in time, includes the three waters. And that's very much a pragmatic decision that we have taken in terms of we know that there is doubt about the reforms. We understand that the new government are indicating that they will repeal. Despite the fact that the Auditor General has advised that legislation has been passed and to all intents and purposes councils should be progressing their LTPs, removing the three waters after year 2, I think, again, pragmatically, that is now unlikely to happen. So we're looking at it from a 10-year perspective, but we have additional work in the background to undertake as to understand what our numbers would look like if we were to remove water after the second year. I'm hoping that we will get a steer early in the new year from central government around the three waters that will actually help us finalise. And to give you context, most other councils are bringing their long-term plans forward with water contained within it. So I'm going to hand over. As you can see, we've got a full house here today. We've brought all of the team, and the agenda that we're going to take you through is give you a very 2-slide recap on the community pre-engagement. We've had great engagement. We were thrilled with the numbers. This is just a reminder of what we heard from the community. Lisa will talk us through the people's budgets, and then Alison will take us through the revenue and the financial landscapes and the rating options. The last slide, we've termed that as matters for the community. So the last part of the workshop will be, again, an opportunity around what we think may be the big ticket items for long-term plan discussion. Again, this is just us giving a starter for 10. And it's based off what we have heard from the pre-engagement, what our technical experts know. It is also based on some legislation, some central government policy and our own policy. And again, when we get to the second part of the workshop, we will be looking for your guidance as to what you think is in and out. So please bear in mind when you see the numbers today, what we are presenting to you is the whole and the raw data. We will seek that guidance as to how we move things, take things in and out. Now, we're not able to do that through an interactive workshop today in terms of having a spreadsheet up there, which would have been our ideal. That is problematic. So please take it that we will envisage taking away further pieces of work to undertake at your request. So I'm going to hand over to Jenny.
Morena. what I'd like to do first is take you a recap back through a few workshops ago when we looked at setting our strategic direction. And what we did is we looked at the three voices model to do that. So looking at the voice of intent, which is yourselves as councillors, mana whenua, and our legislative landscape. So what was that telling us? What could we hear from them? Then we also looked at our voice of expertise. So all the planning and research that our staff have been doing, what's that telling us? What's coming through for this LTP? And also importantly from our community. So that's our voice of lived experience and what the community were telling us through this process. So maybe if I look at the community ones, and just to recap on those, is in terms of our environmental outcomes, which we align them to, water, balancing land development and lifestyle, access to green space and sustainable farming were the top themes that came out of that. Going through the economic ones, public transport, which has been a consistent theme through our different voices, how we manage that urban spread, and digital connectivity came through as those strong themes. When we go to social, access to healthcare, having a sense of community and ensuring we have good infrastructure came through in that. And then also the cultural, our partnership with mana whenua was very important, and also finding that balance between our protecting our cultural history, promoting our multicultural acceptance. I'm just going to go through to the next slide because that's really where we landed, and we did that workshop and we did a bit of analysis of looking at where did these three voices sort of intersect and what were the key themes that were really important to all. So in terms of those, I'll just go to the right-hand side of the screen. The intersect was really around our natural environment and how we protect and restore that, including our green spaces. Water quality was a very strong theme, as well as public transport that came through that analysis. How we give effect to our treaty partnerships and build relationships, affordability of living, and also having our connected community and how our council's role and how we can facilitate that. To the left-hand side, we have some areas that intersected, but probably not with all three. But these are a couple of other strong themes that came through. I think for council and ourselves as staff, it's around how do we respond to legislative uncertainty, which was quite strong at the time pre-election. How do we support growth now so we stay ahead of the game? And also that live, work and play in the district and how we can enable that. So just retouching and resetting the scene in terms of what that strategic direction was telling us from that research. Unless there are any questions, so I think we can move on. Thank you. I'd like to invite Lisa up, please. Oh, you're there. Okay.
Snuck up earlier.
I'll remove the mic and pass over to Lisa. Thanks.
Good morning, everyone. Can you hear me? Excellent. All right, so if you could put the first slide up, please, Jen. As part of planning resourcing for the long-term plan, we asked our budget holders to assess their future workforce needs based on their activity management plans and provide really detailed thought on the rationale for each role, the benefits to council and to ratepayers, the risks if the roles weren't filled, and what the role costs were. ELT have then done a robust risk assessment based on whether the roles were legislatively required, whether they presented a level of service or reputational risk, what the risk was in terms of growth and size, complexity in the district, and whether there were alternative funding sources. So there was a 5-point rating scale applied to each of those aspects. And just as an example, for legislatively required, if there was no link to legislation, then that would be rated a 1 out of 5. And if it was mandated by legislation, that would be rated a 5 out of 5. So each of the roles was assessed on that 5-point rating scale. Next slide, please, Jen. Noting that we have many challenges in terms of inflationary pressures and the likelihood of double digits in terms of our rate increase if we put in everything that we're asking for, the risk assessment approach resulted in a high, medium and low risk outcome to the organisation of not bringing those FTE requests forward. This was really challenging for ELT. However, the approach has helped to crystallise our strategic approach and our thinking. We have also sought to repurpose vacancies, clarify our operating models, and seek external funding sources for roles rather than the ratepayer. These were all stretch challenges that we, as Tier 3 and the ELT, have applied with rigour. The process to determine the additional FTE requests will also be used for all future long-term plan and all annual plans in future. Additionally, a full analysis has been done against the approved structure from 2022 to ensure that we have audit traceability on any role changes that have occurred with the repurposing or shifting of FTE in the last 12 months. Next slide, please, Jen. So, this is the recommendation as a result of that full and robust process. A total of 22.65 roles are put forward in the long-term plan, total of 1.65 million. And that's the split across the group. So 3.4 in community services and facilities, of which 1.4 are short-term, 4 in development and growth, 4.5 in enabling services, and 10.75 in infrastructure and property. And I'll talk you through the split on the next 2 slides. So when you see the next 2 slides, they are combined into this final recommendation. Next slide, please. Thank you. So these roles were assessed as critical. So these were the highest risk to council if we do not fill them. And therefore, they are the highest priority. And regardless of whether there was alternative funding available for them, they are put forward and recommended by ELT. So 13.15 roles, total of 1.35 million, 365 million. And then the next slide is a little harder to understand, but bear with me. So of the 44.14 FTE requested, it was proposed that 9.5 of those roles could essentially be self-funded, either through revenue, reduction in consulting spend, or reallocating budget from other groups or existing vacancies. We needed to make sure that all of that operational budget actually existed before we banked it. And this is the total result of that exercise. So in development and growth, it was proposed that the one role that we were putting forward could be repurposed through reduction in consultant spend. That consultant spend was not originally put in the operating budget, and therefore it is true cost to the organisation. In infrastructure and property, there were 8.5 roles put forward. 5.5 of those can be fully funded through fees, charges, and genuine cost reallocation. 2 roles will be transferred from enabling services, and 1 role from consultant spend, which was not originally budgeted in the OPEX. If we don't fill that role, though, the consultant spend will be significantly higher. So the total for 9.5 roles is actually 292,000 based on reallocating funds from other places. Before we go ahead, time for questions on the people budgets.
I'll just chip in there. Thank you for that, Lisa. So again, what we wanted to bring was just really open and transparency around our thinking and our thought processes, give you some confidence in terms of some of the rigour that we were putting forward and the risk lens that we have applied. And we're very conscious about just making sure that as we make changes, that we have good audit and trackability to make sure that we are not double dipping on FTE, and that the FTE is real and exists. So we've put a very good framework in place, and that is again what we will be utilising going forward for any future requests, whether it be the annual plan. So the team have done a really good job. It's been thoughtful and yeah, open to any questions, or otherwise we might move on and give you the whole picture in terms of revenue, etc., so that you get the full context.
I think unless there's anything specific on that, we'll come back to this. So Lisa, take a seat at the back and then come back later if there are some questions. But it'd be helpful to get the overall picture before we start delving into it.
Yeah.
Good morning. I'm going to invite the finance team to talk us through our financials. We're going to start with talking you through our revenue streams and what we've been doing in that space.
Thanks, Jen. So I've got Thomas here with me, and we've got quite a few slides to get through today. But just starting off on where we sort of started this process. So we've got three tables in here, our guiding principles around what we are keeping in check with. So we've got our internal compliance, our revenue and finance policy, etc., making sure we're consistent across all areas of the organisation. The external relativity, so what we're talking about there is making sure if we are putting prices up, it's in keeping with the market and we're not pricing ourselves out of it. Looking at sustainability components, customers obviously being considered, and what Lisa just talked to as well is the self-funding of the new roles. The revenue streams, this is where we are just now in terms of what is coming through. So we've got our rates, fees and charges. I'm not going to read that entire list, but that's where we're currently at. And also being cognizant of our new opportunities, some of which PwC talked to earlier this morning as well, where we could possibly look at bringing some new things into the mix. Some of these are reflected into the financials, some aren't at this point. So I think it's probably a good opportunity here also to just talk about some of the legacy issues that we've had. Now, Sharon alluded to this earlier as well. So over the past number of years, we have underinvested in some areas. We have had relatively low rate increases. And if we look at technology, we've got quite a high level of technology debt that's been discussed and socialised quite frequently in these meetings. Renewals and maintenance, so some areas there, roading, some of the facilities not being maintained maybe as regularly and as frequently as they should have been. Also, the ongoing operational costs in some areas have not been fully budgeted either. And new buildings, some of the operational costs that sit alongside those new buildings have not been fully factored into plans in previous iterations. So I think in summary, what I'm saying is where we've had quite low rate increases, had we captured some of these aspects that are on screen just now, we may have been looking at higher rates uplifts in earlier years. And I think this is sort of a precursor to almost getting to where our rates are sitting at now, taking into account some of the things on that slide. I'm going to deliberately pause there to see if anyone has got any questions at this point, just with regards to some of the legacy issues.
And I think just keep, sorry, Alison, yeah, keep going.
I mean, again, looking at our key cost drivers. So part of what we're looking at is where are our key costs coming through from? What is external? What is internal? Everyone will be aware of utility costs and insurance costs that are increasing. And these are costs that to some extent are within our control, some are not. Insurance costs, the only way we can really mitigate some of those is looking at our landscape. What do we insure and what don't we insure? That's a risky space to get into. We've also got quite high maintenance costs that have increased year on year. Some of that's coming through from supply chain issues on the back of COVID that we're still carrying additional costs for. Some of the internal aspects as well. So we've got additional costs coming through from the restructure, circa 8 million.
Alison, can you just maybe lift your microphone up this here up towards, or just change the microphones and move to the one that Thomas has got.
No echo, excellent. Overhead allocations in terms of that, we've obviously got additional staff, so that increased our overhead allocation. Like I mentioned earlier, some of the operational costs associated with new buildings, and we have moved all of our reserve costs and community centre costs to respective targeted rates as well. Jane, do you want to move on?
So sorry, Alison, do you just want to elaborate on that last one a little bit more to give more context?
The reserves and the community centres currently had both aspects of general rate and targeted rate and general rate aspects of both of those rates. So we've moved everything from the general rate out to try to decrease that slightly to increase and they've all been moved to the targeted rates to increase those and yeah, it's pretty much just a reallocation of our costs, really.
So on our key financial assumptions, across the top here, we are taking into account the local government cost indices. So in summary, across all of these headings, planning, regulation, and across that page, where we've got the 3.2% going across, this is what we have applied to the inflationary aspect for the out years in the long-term plan. I think it's just worth pointing out there as well, previously our borrowing rates were around about the 1-2% mark. They're now up at 6%, so that obviously has quite a large impact. And just noting again, as Sharon alluded to earlier, we have got Three Waters in there based on a 10-year plan. There is some opportunities there. If we were to retain that, then that would potentially go over 15 years, but as it stands, is captured in there with all renewals, etc., being factored over 10 years. Jen, can you move on?
This is pretty much just showing our current budgeted capital project spend for every year and the activity that it relates to. We've included the past 2 previous years and the current budget just to show the comparison of, I suppose, what has been achievable and what we have achieved, and then comparison into inflated numbers pushing out into the 10 years. Then at the bottom is just showing a difference between what type of projects they are, either growth, level service or renewal.
I think just adding to that as well, it's quite important to point out that where we are just now in terms of what we have delivered in previous years are circa around about that 80 million mark. What we have in year 1 is a number that's a lot higher there as well. So I think there needs to be a quick check and balance around what capacity do we have to deliver, rather than just pushing things further down the track. From a community standpoint, that may not sit well.
And I'll just feed into that. So I think we've been quite aspirational in previous years about the ability to deliver some of the capital programme. As you know, there's been a fairly large contingent of capital works brought forward. So part of the discussion that we would like to have is being actually more pragmatic about what we realistically can be delivered, and whether this LTP is that opportunity to reset ourselves, make sure that we have achievable targets, but actually we have a newly formed projects team in the infrastructure area that are a brand new team that have just come together, in terms of giving them the opportunity to get their frameworks in place to actually make sure that we are delivering to the percentage of capital improvements that we would like to for our community.
So I mean, similar to the capital one, this is where we're sitting with our operational projects. So we've put a note just in the bottom there to say what is an example of an operational project. So we've got obviously flood modelling, strategy delivery, so economic development strategy factored within there as well, natural environmental funds. I think this one is quite important. So based on where we're at just now, this includes all the projects that have been brought forward as part of this long-term plan. We have a Treasury policy that caps our debt limit at 220%. If you look at the sort of 2 middle lines there, you can see that green line that's overlapping. This is where we need to be quite careful, particularly in, do we go ahead with these projects at this current point in time? How do we phase those? Accepting this is only allowing for the general rate cumulative debt just now, so there'll be other components in there as well. But I think the key point there is we need to be very careful on how we phase those projects to make sure we're not capping out on our debt levels, because that debt has to be serviced in future years as well.
Alison, do you want to reflect around the development contributions and the timing? Because that's an important element to this graph too.
Thanks, Sharon. So where we've got our development contributions, generally they will come in, say, on average 3 to 4 years after that project has been completed. So in its infancy, we have to fund that ourselves, whether it be through loan funding or working capital. So that just increases that debt profile and obviously pushes out some of those servicing costs until such times we can match that on that development contribution coming through. And now we move on to our rating options. Jen, do you want to just move to the next slide? And Thomas, are you happy to?
This is a very just raw data dump of our expected rate increases for the year. What we have done is try to keep them as either equal or jump them up at the front if they need to be. For example, like the general rate, library, and like reserve, we have tried to take a hit up front to catch up to the increases in costs quickly. So then in later years, we can have less of a spend later on, but it's real, just a raw number dump of what at the current rate, what they are.
I think it's important just to note here, so in year one, where we've got general rate of 23%, if we look back to that key cost drivers that we've got just now, so we've got our insurance, we've got utilities, etc. If we push that through into year one, it means that we can then balance off. If we say reduce the 23 down and try and phase it more, then you're not getting that economies of scale saving on those out years. So as Thomas alluded to, bringing that cost forward allows us to have those outer years at a lower level.
Our next two slides are just a couple of straight rate examples based on a capital value of 975 in Rolleston, showing at what the current charge, what their annual charge increase would be and percentage, and then have an average of about 9.5 over the 10 years, and is about the same as the next slide of a Darfield property of about 11 million.
So this one is just a very high level illustration around other councils and what information they've published thus far. Just making reference to this would be year one. So we're sort of sitting at the lower end of that. We don't have all the data around what other councils have produced, some quite variable numbers. Some may or may not include everything that we've got within there, but this is just a very high level illustration on where we're sitting in comparison to others.
So what I would suggest, and just in terms of summary, so we've provided a lot of information there for you in the context. And so just to reiterate, what's really clear is as we move on to the next slides, and this is the matters for the community, what we have wrapped up into that is the starter for 10. And as the team have said, what is encompassed in that is all of the capital projects, etc. So in terms of, as we discuss what are the key areas that councillors wish to guide us or guide the LTP for going out on consultation on, we can get into the discussion after this around, you will see what some of the main capital projects are that are currently incorporated into the budget, but as capital spend. And I've got to be really clear, there's a difference between operational spend and capital spend, and Alison will talk more to that as we go through. Because if we need to shift some funding around, the capital spend will be based around our loan funding as opposed to a direct operational cost.
Yeah, I think, Sharon, just on that as well, within the slides we did sort of note.
Alison, can you talk up?
Within the slides we did point out that on average, if we take $1 million out, it's roughly equating to, say, a 1% drop. But as Sharon noted, if we've got that capital project as loan funded, that's not going to flow through. So you might have an operational component of it that will flow through, but not the loan funded aspect. So it's not quite as simple as saying, let's take all of these capital projects out and push them out. There could be a review of our operational cost base to see what would come out in that space or what could come out. So there's a few different things in the mix there to be considered.
Sorry. Can I ask a question? Sorry.
Do you want to follow through the rest of this before, or are you happy to?
I don't mind a question now.
Deborah, fire away.
Okay, thank you. Look, it was on the previous slides, and that's why I want to ask a question. And I guess it's around the uniform annual general charge, which has 30% cap. And I picked up your slide where it said reserves costs and community centre costs to the respective targeted rates. Now, normally the UAGC fits in with the targeted rate, and I just wanted to know, where do we sit with our 30% cap? Because under our last LTP, I think we were sitting at 29.9 or 29.8%, and the cap's 30. So I just wondered, have you actually had an opportunity to look at the rating take in that area?
Currently, we have not looked at it in depth, as we're still trying to we're still trying to solidify numbers, so it's quite hard to, because there could be potential changes.
Okay, thanks for that. I just wanted to highlight it.
Thanks, Deborah. Are there any other questions that people have got? Yeah. Phil.
So just got a quick one. Can you go back a couple of slides? One more. That one there. I'm not following this. How that works. Can you just quickly explain to me what that's showing?
It's showing a % increase year on year for the individual activities, and including all the rates that are involved in those activities.
So the general rate, say, just take for example the let's take the 24 to 34 year, it's 10%
on average, yes.
And all the targeted rates below, is that contained? What does that?
Every line and % number are their own individual percents. We haven't. It's very hard to compile an average of all of them into one slide, as it's very comparative based on capital value or different aspects that different properties have on their rates.
So is that, say if we take the library one there, there'll be a 6% increase in rates for library alone based on the library budget.
Yes, and then those 10 years are the individual rate increases those years. Yeah, and they include loan repayments.
Someone will have to explain it offline. I'm still not quite there.
Okay.
Elizabeth?
On the same graph, just looking at why metered water is at 20% and refuge is only 3% when we want to encourage people to reduce and really address the way that they work with their rubbish and reduce their rubbish, and yet water is the source of life. It seems a little crazy that that's the high rate. Is this open for debate, or is this a set rate that you're looking at proposing?
These will obviously have impacts based on if you want to take stuff out, but based on the current budgets, there are different activities. So as the refuse, the budget didn't need a huge increase compared to the metered water or the water. So it's hard to work out, but we can chop and change slightly.
I think what Thomas is trying to say, and Alison, you may just clarify this for me, is that the percentage increases there are specific and is reflective of what is required and the level of investment that is required to either meet legislative requirements, so or regulatory requirements, or actually the operational requirements.
Agree.
Can you just clarify that number on metered water? So just so I'm absolutely clear what you're saying there, are you saying the per cubic metre rate is going to increase by 20% per annum over the 10-year LTP period that we charge our ratepayers?
At the current budgets, yes.
Cool. Where do we resign? Do we leave now or?
Lydia.
Yeah, someone to grant. I guess I have some concerns along the numbers that we're seeing, and we knew that we were going to see some unappetizing numbers. Is this information going to be shared with us after today so that we can actually review and digest some information? I know that a lot of it is subject to change, but I guess I'd like to see it.
I was just going to say, in terms of the water stuff, that's funded over 10 years. It's because of the three water stuff. It's been put in recently. I mean, there will be opportunities to actually stretch that out to 15, 20 years, potentially, which would bring that percentage increase down. So that's an anomaly from the way that water is funded, brought about by the three waters, and our relatively recent decision to put it in for 10 years.
And that's a really good point, is that, some of our other areas of infrastructure, we are looking at it more intergenerational around the 25 years. And thank you, Tim, for just pointing that out, is that the water is based on 10 years. It could be pushed out to 15, 20, 25 years. And this is where we're in this challenging situation around the Three Waters reform at the moment and wanting that guidance from central government going forward. And it may well be that that's one of the guidance that we get from you today as around the long-term plan, and that's something we'll be asking for clear direction on, as to whether we keep Three Waters in the LTP as opposed to shortening it and reflecting it in a 2-year as requested or as stands by current legislation. Yes, you will get the slides and the information. And again, please take it, this is a start of a conversation.
Yeah, that's right. And I mean, I'm just aware that this is live streamed, and this is the first time that we're seeing these numbers. And so are probably people in our community. So it's...
Yes, it is confronting, and it is challenging, and this isn't unique to Selwyn. You saw some of the slides around some of the rate increases around the country, and we acknowledge very much that these are challenging numbers to see.
I think too on this slide, realising that each of the rates percentage increases on a different number. So some of those rates are on the cents or on the hundreds of dollars, depending on what the rate is actually for. In the metered water charge, I think it was a couple of years ago, someone, Murray might be able to remind us, that we put the rate up for metered water about 20%, and that's what the community asked us to do, and moved it away from a fixed charge and allowed the per unit charge to be lifted to 20%. So actually the reflection here is actually continuing with what the community said 2 or 3 years ago around that. But good to hear that if we keep the water in here and expect it to be here over the 10 years, which is what the government is currently signalling, and we're waiting for confirmation on that with a repeal of the current Three Waters legislation, that the debt funding can be extended beyond the 10 years and will look out into the 20s, as Sharon has said.
Would you like to carry on, please, Jen?
Oh, sorry, one other question there. You've got that example, that's what they had in front of us there. With the general rate on a property of $11 million, the general rate portion of their rates would be far higher than the targeted rate options, and yet their lift in the LTP is only 12%. That just seemed like it didn't stand out quite the same as I thought it might, compared to seeing the 23% general rate increase. Do you think that number's right?
Do you mean the average, the total average?
For year 24-25, the percentage lift is 12.5% on the graph here, And I just would have thought of an $11 million property, the targeted rates would make up a far smaller portion of their overall rates increase, and it would look a lot closer to the general rate number than the targeted rate average. So I just wanted to check that as that sits, it's a lot flatter than what the general rate spike in the previous two slides kind of suggested.
Okay, we can have a look at that and come back.
Anyone else have any questions on those slides? We can come back to it anyway. We'll carry on then, Jen.
So this section is taking you through what we are seeing as the emerging themes coming from our planning processes, listening to the community and listening to conversations here within the chambers. So we've got a number that we'd like to take you through today with various members of our team here. So big decisions, just in a quick summary, we'll talk to you about water, transport, and also our community of facilities, our major facilities. There is also some what we call, I wouldn't say minor, but they are not as big as the ones that I've just spoken to, but there are a few other matters that we feel as though we could seek community guidance on through this LTP process, and we'll take you through that. A lot of that's based around water. And then there's a number of things that, as we've gone through the planning processes, that we feel as though we should be transparent with our community about and talk on these matters. They're not necessarily for consultation, but we would like to talk to the community about them. And I'm going to invite up our water team first to talk through chlorination, which is our first major big decision.
And again, please, councillors, take it that this is just a starter for 10 around, again, that pre-engagement and some advice from our technical experts.
Okay, before I hand over to Joe, who's our Water Services Asset Manager, to talk through chlorination, just to talk again to Grant's point, there are some large increases in the water rate. Team decision was made to recover most of that debt over a 10-year period. If that was extended out, then that debt could be reduced. But as you go through these big decisions, you'll notice some large capital costs. So to remove chlorine from our supplies, which Joe will talk about shortly, $67 million is currently in the budget. If the council made a decision to have chlorine remain in the supply, that cost would come out and that cost increase would dramatically reduce in the overall rate for water. So I'll pass over to Joe.
Thanks, Murray. Kia ora koutou. So currently we've got a requirement under the drinking water quality assurance rules that came in November 2022 to have residual chlorine in our water network unless there's an exemption granted. So our first exemption for Rakaya Huts has been resubmitted, and the team met with Tamata Arawai this week. So we're just working through the final parts of the paperwork that's been requested for that. So based on our experiences with the Rakaya Huts process, the team have costed what it would take to remove residual chlorine to move to intermittent chlorination. So that basically means if there was an issue in the system or there was risk of contamination, then chlorine could be added at that point. But as a general rule, the residual chlorine could be removed from 17 schemes if we're able to obtain an exemption for those schemes. So just to clarify, that's not all water schemes. And there's a series of capital upgrades that would be required if we were to seek exemptions for these 17 schemes. And they're things like UV disinfection, storage upgrades, renewals of sections of pipe. And all up, that would be 67.4 million. There would be a further 15.2 million of operational costs over the LTP period, as well as the capex. So we've basically got two options up on the slide, which is continue with residual chlorination in all of our networks, and there would be no rating change from current for that. And option 2 is to apply for chlorine exemptions and have the capital and operational costs for all 17 schemes that we believe have potential, which would be 67.4 million with 15.2 OPEX. We could choose to go on a risk and likelihood based approach. So target some of the schemes. Just picked some examples here. So if we went with Rakai Heights, it's already in progress. Springston, Tomutu, Jowers Road, Lincoln and Claremont, then if we were to choose those schemes, it would be 9.4 million with 3.5 OPEX. Or if we went for the schemes with the lowest cost per connection, which are the larger schemes, which makes some sense, would be more difficult to obtain those exemptions, be a more complex process. But we could slice it that way and have 24.6 million capex and 6.7 OPEX. We also do have the opportunity to target the rate to the individual townships that were benefiting from moving to intermittent chlorination.
Just to add to that point, Council made a decision some time ago, which was a good decision, to harmonise the rates across all schemes. The question comes now, if we're going to have a special level of service, do we then have a special targeted rate for those schemes who are intermittently chlorinated? So we could either charge all ratepayers for this benefit in terms of if they're on a water supply, or we could say actually water supply X, Y, and Z, if you want to be intermittently chlorinated, then there'll be an additional charge to your rates to cover those costs. That's a decision that Council may choose to make.
I think it would be fair to say as well, recognising that there was a cost for putting residual disinfection in. There is a significant cost for removing, and despite the fact if we are successful in getting an exemption, just because we get an exemption doesn't mean to say that we should either. So there's a pragmatic and philosophical discussion to be had around this. And as you can see, these costs are included into the budgets that you've had presented to you. So there's the obvious that if Council give guidance to not to, then those are capex and operational costs that would be removed. That would then shift the budget.
Sorry, just so you're saying that the 20% we saw on the previous one, the increases in the water costs, included these costs. At what level? The 67 million, the 9 million, or the 24 million?
So the full cost of 67 million is included at this point.
So Murray, at the top you've got option 1, no change to current rates. That would mean that the water unit charge rate to 24 would be 0.
No, because there are other things that dictate.
Okay, so
a portion of that, okay.
So no, it's probably not. No, it's not to be read quite that way. It's basically saying if we were to take that out, then that portion wouldn't be increased, but there still will be increases because we have other operational costs and other projects which we need to fund. So it doesn't bring us down to 0, but it will reduce that greatly.
It's cool. It'd be nice to understand what that is, just because that slide hints that it would be a 0, which is no change to current rates. So if we could clarify what that impact would look like. I think it's a big decision, certainly a big decision for our community, and we've said we wanted to go to the community with it. When the entities were considering chlorination, part of their conversation was if we're all getting together and Bulla has to have chlorine and Christchurch doesn't want it, then why should Bulla pay for Christchurch's chlorine-free water? And I think there is that level of fairness around who's paying for what level of service. It was fine when we were providing the same water to people, and I think we've gone down that track well up to this point. If we're going to now go down a specified chlorine removal track, I think there needs to be consideration of where the costs sit for that. If we're going to do it for everyone, then that's a different thing, but if it's only going to be 1 or 2 townships, that changes stuff, I think, in that space. I guess the flip side of that is if we do Rolleston and then someone else wants, another town wants it, actually the capacity of the low connection charge in Rolleston means that the costs are higher elsewhere, and so actually the water costs then go back to a model that would look very different from a flat scheme that we've got now. Any other questions on Grant?
Are you wanting feedback now, or are you waiting to the end? I was one of the greatest supporters of non-chlorination of water, and it's still my desired outcome, but I'm also a pragmatist. And the reality is Christchurch has spent millions of dollars for no advantage for them getting non-chlorinated water. Tamata Arapawa hasn't budged a bit. And the definition of madness is doing the same thing and expecting a different result. So I would suggest that we don't go to consultation on taking chlorine out. We make a decision as a governance group, given our current financial situation, that we stick with the status quo until any other obvious example becomes available to us, because once that becomes available, then we reconsider it. But doesn't seem to be any point putting it out for consultation at that level of cost when we've got the challenges in front of us. Why consult on something which is unachievable for our community? Because it largely is unachievable, what we've seen so far. So that's eating a bit of rat, but that's what you've got to do.
Murray, do you want to talk about the achievability of it and the result that we're expecting from Rakai Huts, and how you've made the decision to say that we could get this for those townships?
Well, I think from the outset, and following on to what Sharon said, staff wouldn't recommend taking chlorine out. Staff's recommendation would be to have chlorine remain in our supplies. One, it is the safest way to go forward, and two, it's the most affordable way to go forward. We chose Rakai Huts because it was our lowest risk supply. It was the easiest one to achieve. We have not yet achieved that, although we feel we are heading in a very positive direction to achieving it. For Rakai Huts, we're talking in the order of sort of hundreds of thousands, but as you see up here, we're talking about tens of millions for the remaining supplies. So Rakai Huts is achievable because it's a small scale. As you ratchet up, it gets a lot more unaffordable. I think we need to wait until we see if we get Rakai Huts across the line. It does look optimistic at this point, but yeah. So is it achievable? Yes, but are these costs absolute? No. As we go through the process, there could be more and more legislative requirements and requirements for us to meet, and so those costs, in fact, could go up.
Okay. Deborah, did you hear something?
Yes, I did, and it's on this chlorination. Just curious as to if you put into the well the ability to put in chlorine, and you're saying it's going to cost us to take it out to do intermittent adding of chlorine. I don't fully understand that, because you've got the mechanism in there to put the chlorine in. You either only add the chlorine through that mechanism. You don't take it out intermittently. I don't sort of follow that reasoning in the explanation.
Murray, do you want to explain intermittent chlorine and what you mean by the terminology?
Yeah, so I might just cover the cost aspect, and then I'll talk about intermittent chlorination. And you're right, Deborah, it seems nonsensical that you add chlorine in, costs go up, you take chlorine out, they go up again. I understand that. The reason for that is when we were running chlorine-free schemes originally, that was under the old legislation. We then moved into new legislation, we had to add chlorine, so there's a cost of the product, but there's also the cost of the monitoring to make sure that we get the residue of the chlorine through the network. Now that we want to take chlorine out under the new regulations, again, the magnitude of burden for us to prove that we have safe water has increased dramatically. So the magnitude of testing, the upgrades of the UV units, we have UV units, but to meet viral protection, we have to increase the size of those units, the electricity costs, the monitoring cost of cord, all those costs go up to prove that we are still running a safe supply. So that's why it goes up. Intermittent chlorination, as Joe mentioned before, generally speaking, the supplies we're running with chlorine free, so no chlorine added. But then if we have any indication that there could be a potential for contamination, so we're not waiting for E. coli or total coliforms necessarily, we may see a pressure drop that we can't explain in the network. All of those things, then there'll be a burden for us to add chlorine for that short period of time until we can guarantee, as far as practicable, that there's no risk to the supply. So running a non-chlorine supply, which we're calling intermittent chlorine supply, yeah, it's the next level of requirements for us to meet.
Thanks for that question, Deborah. Phil?
I guess I'll just pick up on what Grant was saying a few minutes ago. I wonder whether or not, I think making decisions is the way to go, but then as chlorine is always going to be such a big hot topic for our community, whether by us making a decision and then not putting it out for consultation we're missing an opportunity for the community to actually see what the financial effects are of going down each of the individual tracks. Yeah, I guess whatever forum we go to, chlorine and water is what people talk about.
Thanks, Phil. Elizabeth?
I agree with what you've said, Phil. I think it's important for the community to see the decision that we're making and the cost to us. I also would like for us to be able to leave this on the table and come back to this decision after we see whether any exemptions are granted by Te Matu Arawai, because so much is weighing on whether we're actually going to get an exemption here. Also, in terms of the long-term effects, yes, we're looking at what it's costing us now, but I've lived in countries where people didn't drink the water out of their taps and they bought bottled water in plastic bottles. Now, the cost to us sustainably and environmentally is significant there, and so we need to actually factor in those additional costs, because then we will have gazillions of plastic bottles potentially ending up in landfills, and that's another enormous cost to us as a council.
Thanks, Elizabeth. Shane?
Kia ora, Sam. Tēnā rā tātou. Kasua, ngamihi for the report, and thank you very much for presenting the options. Do all of the options meet the minimum requirements, legislative requirements? I think alternatively, Phil and Elizabeth, we went for consultation, and as Grant said, we were elected to make the decisions within the legislative requirements. Option 1 still provides that. And as far as I knew as a new councillor then, was that being leaders in this space, Selwyn most certainly a leader in the space of residual implementation of chlorination should it be needed. And we're still continuing on that path with option 1 in a graduated approach in line with legislative requirements and feedback from Taumata Arawai. In option 2, A, B and C, were they in line with previous forecasts from the last long-term plan, or was it an implemented push to sort of get ahead of the curve by some of the approaches that you've listed here?
So both options would meet legislative requirements, so we wouldn't do anything where we would be not meeting those guidelines and rules. And then, so this was discussed previously, it's been consulted on, but the costs have increased from that time. Inflationary costs, but also because we now have a greater understanding of the level we need to meet.
And has the, Murray, has the past matrix, the risk matrix that we've used in the past been applied to the options, to option 2?
Loosely. Yeah. The previous matrix was looking at what supplies, we came from the position of having no chlorine in our water supplies, and so the matrix looked at what supplies were of the highest risk and which ones we should implement chlorination earlier. Since then, legislation has overtaken that risk assessment, so that risk assessment process is no longer appropriate because the legislation has overtaken it. That said, when we're looking at the based on a risk and likelihood, that is based on that risk matrix. We think it's the lowest risk supplies, so the easiest to achieve and the cheaper value.
And I guess with that residual supply as well, it was always intended that the infrastructure would be there in case of, so you would never take it away because the potential is still there when we meet the legislative requirements. Thank you.
So the direction from the discussion today is not to land on like what the ultimate is. So this is the first time we've seen the stuff. It's the first time we're discussing these things. There's going to be opportunities to talk in the new year. But if there's a view around shaping so that staff, we don't want to go out to the community with 6 options in the space, because then it gets confusing around feedback. So if there's an option 1 that talks about the residual disinfection continuing, and option 2, or whatever the number option is all 17 townships identified, and then we can hear the submissions from places that really want to see it happen, and that helps us to understand what the costs and where the drivers for that are, rather than, I don't know, I feel like if we're choosing option B or C here that go out, we're starting to direct the conversation further than what might be necessary. And I hear what you've said, Grant, around could we make the decision here. I think that the level of public interest in chlorination and the conversations we've had with our communities already has said we want to seek exemptions. We're going down a process of seeking a first exemption to understand what the outcome would be and likely costs could be before we had a further conversation. So while we could just go option one, I think we've already talked to our community about a further conversation, and the long-term plan is the appropriate place for that level of discussion. Grant.
Just some clarity around the numbers. Option 2A, the CapEx and OpEx, is that those 10-year numbers, is the OpEx an annual number, 15 million?
That's a 10-year number.
Okay, so just to what I was saying earlier on, every $1 million is a 1% rates increase, so it's about a 1.5% rates increase, the OpEx, plus the CapEx cost on top of that. So I guess what I'd be liking us to do is to try and, if we're going to put it in the paper, is to tell our ratepayers what the likely cost to their rates burden is by having that in, because to me that just seems a lovely free hit to get 1.5 million, 1.5% off your annual rates bill straight away. Status quo prevails, and if an opportunity comes for us to take chlorination out in the future, well, we're all boots and all. But
thanks, Grant. Malcolm.
Yeah, I'm agreeing with Grant here, and I'm certainly about his earlier comments about not wanting chlorine. I do not like the taste of my cup of tea in Prebbleton anymore. It seems to me that just leaving the option one, leaving the status quo, is what we've been talking about. But there's another option: is it possible for a household to put on
a filter
a $67 million rate increase over multiple years? So is there an opportunity that, should we, in the LTP process, have an alternative where the council may be able to bulk buy filtration units and sell them to their ratepayers at a discounted rate? Therefore, they would then get the water quality they wanted, and we would still be cheaper than what we did in the first place.
Yeah.
Murray, you got any thoughts on it?
I think administrative nightmare, but so I'm probably not in favour of that option. I do hear what you're saying, and I suppose the difference is, under the bench unit quite cheap, whole house unit a lot more expensive. So there's that
3,000
variability there as well. But I think it'd be quite a hard thing to administer and allocate out. So I think I'd probably prefer leave that to the ratepayers.
Thank you, Elizabeth.
The logistics, I like the idea, Malcolm, but the logistics around getting enough filters and the filtration systems and the carbon filtration systems, there's a huge supply and demand issue at the moment of availability. And so it would be very good to see the difference between actually what the cost is going to be to the ratepayer of us not having it versus what it's going to cost them and actually having quality filtration, because we're also looking at having fluoride put in. So if we're going to have fluoride put in and have fluoride filtration available in the filtrations for home kits, that's a really enormous cost, and it's very difficult to get that sort of heavy duty filtration available in New Zealand.
I won't say any more about that, just to say that we talk about fluoride a bit later on in this presentation.
So Nicole, you'll be the last one. I'm going to break for morning tea, just because we're going to need to ration a long day. Nicole.
Thanks for that. The whole thing with the units, I think that's on the individual ratepayer. And I'm sorry, I really struggle with these conversations at times. I grew up, this is the only place I've lived that doesn't have chlorinated water. So there's also that perspective as well. It is genuinely a really good way of making sure our population doesn't get sick. And when we're talking about larger populations like Rolleston, we cannot guarantee, no matter what happens in that network, that we will have water that is free of contamination. And the question I ask is, like, how often are we actually testing our water? And we're not testing our water all the time, everywhere in the network. And we need to be mindful about that as well.
Thanks, Nicole. We're going to adjourn the meeting and we'll start back at 11 o'clock. Thank you. Welcome back to the next part of our LTP big decision conversation. We're going to just use the time that we've got now to allow the team to push through all of the rest of the presentation, and then we'll come back to each of the big decisions where councillors have questions or thoughts that they'd like to elaborate on. So, Jen, if we just do one after the other and move right through. Thank you.
No problem. I'm inviting our transport team to discuss with us now public transport, and then we'll talk about the cycleways. Thanks, Andrew.
Yes, thank you very much and good morning. Yes, just a quick recap across public transport. It's one of those topics that had come up through the public engagement, so we felt it worth to highlight a little bit further in regards to what our thinking is and what some possible actions council could take going forward. So, as we know, regional councils are responsible for providing the public transport services, whereas district councils are responsible for providing the infrastructure. Our hopes and dreams very much were pinned back in 2020 odd in terms of the Greater Christchurch PT Futures business case, which looked at what was needed to improve the core services and expand into the rest of the network across Greater Christchurch. And in between all of that and now, we've also completed, from the Greater Christchurch perspective, the MRT Mass Rapid Transit business case, which basically has concluded that MRT is viable within the city, but not out to the districts. So we have a problem that at the moment, with a lack of funding for PT on a number of different fronts, a lot of it is stalled, particularly around those initial parts for PT Futures in terms of core services and rest of network. A lot of the funding relies on coming from the NZTA Wakatahi. So if that funding is not available or is limited, that snails us all up as well. In terms of what ECAN is progressing for 24-27, they are trying their best to assist us in regards to introducing or working towards getting additional funding for more direct services for the district, and also possible on-demand trials as well, such as, for instance, My Way in Timaru, if you're familiar with it. The other aspect that we've been discussing as a council and is around what options are available to council if we actually wanted to set up our own public transport service, and for instance, providing more connectivity around the rest of the district in terms of the wider district beyond Greater Christchurch. That is a complicated situation in terms of if we wanted to do that. There are certain requirements that we have to meet in terms of it has to be a service that can't be in competition with metro services. We also have to show that it is viable, and we have to get a series of approvals and exemptions from the likes of both Environment Canterbury and the NZTA. Those discussions are ongoing at the moment in terms of trying to work out a way through this that we could possibly do it. But in terms of the bottom line, this would be at a cost to council to run a service such as this. And that has, while it's been flagged as possibly something that this LTP can accommodate, we have no figures yet available to us in terms of potentially what that could cost if council wanted to go down that route. But in the meantime, for our LTP, draft LTP, we have actually got dialed in our requirements in terms of, from an infrastructure perspective, what we need to provide or seeking to provide in terms of park and ride facilities at both Lincoln and Rolleston. We also have our ongoing bus stop improvement program in terms of new shelters and real-time information systems, and also, as you see up there, a figure to be able to coordinate with ECAN in terms of developing the necessary business cases. In regards to the park and ride, it has been evident through all the business case phases for PT Futures, in terms, including the MRT aspect, that our best bang for buck, if you want to put it that way, for the district is in terms of improving those direct services from the likes of Rolleston and Lincoln into the city. and that is coordinated then around being able to provide the park and ride facilities to enable people to be able to do that in terms of being able to drive, bike, walk to transport hubs such as this, and then being able to catch those services in and out of town. So that would be where we're sitting at the moment in regards to that. All right, the next one on the list is in regards to some major cycleways that have been again discussed for quite a long period of time, and that's in regards to the Alpines to the Sea cycleway, and also the cycleway around Te Wharewa, the Lakeside Trail. So the Alpine to Sea Trail, that was actually first sort of came about with discussions back in 2009, I think it was, in terms of an initiative to basically connect or provide a combination recreational and transport focused sort of cycleway across the plains, at least from the Alps, Arthur's Pass, for instance, to the coast. And so this has been on again, off again, and we've decided for the draft LTP to punt it up in terms of this initiative in regards to what it could mean for the district for tourism opportunities, transport opportunities in terms of providing alternatives, particularly for the connectivity across the plains, where we have already included in our current LTP planning, or LTP, to connect up the likes between Springfield and Kirwee, connect all those Melbourne townships up. And so the stage one in terms of that represented reflects that connectivity of essentially what's in our LTP now. The tricky bit is the stage two, which is the section running from the Alps to the plains, in terms of trying to get down through, all that rugged terrain up there. And also, of course, there's also been initiatives going on to start the Te Wharewa Lakeside Trail through WET, and some of the good work they've been doing to try and get that up and running. At the moment, we've got feasibility studies occurring on all of those, and the results of that will start to become available early next year with the objective to complete them in about April. And at the moment, those costs that are sitting in there are high estimates, probably low in terms of the way these things work, but we felt that we needed to get a placeholder into the draft LTP and enable this discussion to occur. So that would be that in regards to the main cycleways. And of course, we've got our own program of the more routine intra-district township cycleways that are going on in conjunction with this. But as we are familiar with the new government, the focus is starting to turn away from these type of activities. Thank you very much.
Thank you. We'll move on to, we've got a couple of more major big decision slides, and then what we do have is what we've called we've got two slides around what we see as minor decisions, and once we get to the end of those two slides, we will stop and open for conversation. You will see in the side pack there is a whole heap of other information about keeping our community informed. I don't anticipate we'll have time to get to that today, so we'll stop after the two minor slides and then open the floor for discussion.
Thank you, Sharon.
Just in terms of context setting, and Jenny, I'll start with the Sheffield slide, if you could get that ready, please. Just in the last few months, ELT has moved to an all of ELT overview of planned facilities going forward, and that will also include an expectation that Community Services and Facilities Group is as accountable as property is for planned builds and the process associated with the reporting and monitoring of their progress bar the actual build itself. That's a change. We haven't quite got there, and so there are one or two costs that that are in the current budget that have not necessarily been socialised and reported to council prior to this, but this is the opportunity to give you some insights into that. Just before I go into the Melbourne ward area, ELT is also committed to taking a whole of district strategic view and a review of some of the existing plans associated with various public facing facilities. It's not that there aren't these plans, that they don't exist, it's that they exist in isolation. And so the view of ELT is that going forward, it will be a much more integrated view that we have right across the district of the various facilities, whether it's about a swimming pool, whether it's about a sports centre, whether it's about a community centre or hall. So just as we move into what is effectively the Melbourne ward, Council will recall an earlier presentation on the topic of a potential closure of Sheffield Pool and a potential investment in a sports court in Darfield. This was at the 8th of November 2023 meeting, and similarly in the summer pool update, there was a signal around the closure of Sheffield Pool. The current budget proposes the Darfield sports courts proceed in 2026-27 at a cost of $11,825,000. The council team proposes that the Sheffield pool closure is, while it is consulted on, that the position is that council intends to close it, and as such has not retained ongoing operational costs associated with it, but has included some demolition costs in the current budget in front of you. So I'm just alerting you to the fact that significant changes in direction have not necessarily been fully costed. The council may also want to consider asking the community about whether the Darfield sports courts progresses as is currently in the budget, or whether that's deferred until 2027-28, and that would give us, while it would allow for the design work to take place, it would also allow us the opportunity to have a much more strategic view right across the district about the future facilities that we might see. And at this stage, when we talk about operational costs, I think sometimes firstly council teams are talking about different things, and I'm certain that councillors are understanding different things. There are two different types of operational costs. One is associated with the repairs and maintenance of a building, and they are generally factored into the budget. But in the case of some of these planned builds, I can assure you that the ongoing operational costs associated with these being open for delivery have not been fully costed until such time as council decides it wants to go out into the LTP with them. So that just suggests that there's a variation to the annual plan, the long-term plan, based on the decisions that you might make. Also, in the combined Central Springs ward, council will recall several reports. One was on the topic of Prebbleton Community Centre, that was in the October meeting. One was on the topic of Rolleston Community Centre, that was the October meeting. And additionally, there has been a previous 2021 Centres, Halls and Libraries Network Plan, which suggested a new community facility somewhere in Rolleston in response to the growth. In addition, within this combined Central Springs ward area, monies have already been approved and development has already commenced in regards to the Lincoln Domain and the associated master plan adjustment and land extension. So the current LTP budget does include $13,644,000 for an upgrade to Lincoln Events Centre, specifically for the purpose of creating it into a civil defence centre, as an additional civil defence centre is required somewhere in that vicinity in Selwyn, but also as a a response to making it a more environmentally resilient building, which is a response to the environmental strategy. And there's some, a smaller portion of the cost is associated with the earthquake strengthening. The team proposes that in the combined Central Springs ward, due to fiscal constraints council is now facing, that council considers proposing both to remove the Prebbleton Community Centre physical building of $8 million scheduled for years 3 and 4. And that's pending further works and associated land purchases around Kakaha Park and pending the works already being planned with the Lincoln Domain, because one or other of those options may, to some degree, meet the Prebbleton community needs. And the review that we're planning will reveal that. The staff team also suggests removal of the Lincoln Event Centre cost in that regard at this time as well, for that similar reasons, while we do the further work. And we think that the strategic plan that we need to do of the facilities across the district can also give consideration to where a future civil defence centre may be located, and it may or may not be in the current Lincoln Event Centre location as is proposed. And finally, for the Ellesmere Ward, Council will recall an earlier report, November, on the topic of Waihora Whotaro, a sports field reserve master plan, and Whotaro itself a combined community arts, culture space and library service centre. The report identified that while some budget provision had already been made for both the building and the reserve, cost escalations meant that progress is unable to be made until such time as Council decides, following the LTP consultation, whether this project, one, does not go ahead, and even not going ahead will incur a cost of approximately $3 million based on the need to remediate some land and upgrade or replace the Leeston Library Service Centre as it stands. The second option, it was proposed to go out to the community, was with the previously provided footprint plus an additional enlarged community space totaling 19 million. Goes ahead with the footprint previously provided plus the addition of a sports court of 18 million, or proceeds with a standardised design. And just because operational costs have been a topic for the day, the only operational costings that have been done thoroughly are associated with the original option that was proposed to Council. So when Council proposed to increase the size of that building, it needs to also be mindful of the fact that if one of those other options goes ahead, with the exception of the do nothing option, there will be additional operating costs that have yet to be fully costed. So there we have it.
Thank you, Denise. I'd like to invite the water team back up again, please.
So these next two slides are what we're suggesting as minor topics, potentially, and again seeking councillors' guidance, so that the team will work through the next two slides and then we'll open the floor.
So matters for community guidance. So we, in the next LTP period, we're proposing to investigate the feasibility of having a centralised treatment plant for water supply in an area where we believe that we can get low nitrate water. So this is up near the Waimakariri River. There's a few benefits, not only the low nitrate water, but also some operational efficiencies if we were to consolidate our treatment plants into a fewer number of locations. So in the LTP period, we have budgeted to do some issues and options assessment and some further feasibility and concept work. So at the moment, the actual construction has been estimated at 405 million, but the construction costs are sitting outside of this LTP period. So we're proposing to just move forward with 9.4 million of further investigation and very early design. Any construction work that does go ahead would probably be staged anyway, rather than have a single construction period. So it would be it's a long-term project, which would be funded 48% DC and 52% targeted rate. And the next topic is investing in fluoridation. So currently under the Health Fluoridation of Drinking Water Amendment Act, the Director General of Health can instruct local authorities to add fluoride to the water. We are currently not on the list as either being required to add fluoride or under active consideration for adding fluoride. So we're proposing to remove the $7.9 million of costs that have been identified around fluoride and re-add them later on, should we be instructed to do so.
So just to be clear, that $7.9 million is currently in the budget, and so taking that out will reduce those rate increases. With the low nitrate water, that is for population as it stands today, but also looking out to 30 years to meet the demand going out that period as well.
Thank you. And our final matter is digital investment.
So we're proposing to invest some money in our digital system. I guess we're starting from a deficit position. The investment in our systems and processes over the last decade just hasn't been up to level to keep pace with our growth, and we think that it is time to invest in our process. We are currently looking at getting a bit of a roadmap in terms of what's there at the moment, and then coming up with a plan for the future. To do that, though, there needs to be substantial investment. The team is under transition, obviously, with the departure of the Chief Information Officer. So we're putting in some extra support for that and bringing in a person that will do that road mapping, lift the hood and see what's under there and come up with a way forward. And to do some placeholder per year, $1 million per year, just to as a bit of a placeholder for the future. I think we will need some significant investment in the space over the next 5 to 10 years, but this is just a starter.
So just to add on to that, whilst we had initially hoped that we would be stop working. While we were hoping to be in the position of bringing a larger scale investment request related to wanting to integrate our systems, because our current systems aren't integrated. We are very manual orientated, and we can see that there's lots of opportunities to be more digital savvy and perhaps gain some efficiencies over a longer period of time. We're not in that position in this LTP to be able to come with such a structured approach, hence the request for some funding to bring in some expertise that will provide that pathway, understanding that that will then require either further discussions at an outgoing annual plan, or very substantial request will come through for funding in the next long-term plan. What we're also including into there is we see some quick win opportunities around some of our systems that currently aren't in place. So a portion of the $1 million per year over a 3-year period will hopefully allow us to bring some of those quick wins to life as well.
That is us on those matters. Thank you.
So as I've said, the the other slides, which we will make available, are part of a broader about not required for consultation, but it's about keeping our community informed. And so you could, councillors, read those a little bit more at your leisure. Would really like to have the opportunity to open the floor to discussions for some of the bigger issues and the couple of minor issues that we have raised.
Great, thank you. Deborah, I can't see your hand if it's up, but I'll just offer you the opportunity first if you'd like to contribute to the conversation.
Thank you. Just with regards to the communities, we go back to the Prebbleton Community Centre and the Lincoln Event Centre. Are you suggesting that those projects not go ahead or be withdrawn from the long-term plan? And more for the Prebbleton Community Centre, which has been part of the Prebbleton Town Centre Master Plan of 2010. It's currently sitting as a project in our LTP process and has been for a number of years. Are you suggesting that that now be withdrawn, given the growth and the DCs that have now been collected? Or are you suggesting that further work is needed on this particular project?
In regards to Prebbleton Community Centre, what is proposed is that while we can justify a need as the various reports presented, they weren't asked to make a comparison across the district against different facilities. And we think that given some of the work underway with the likes of Kakaha Park still to take place, and the work that's still happening in terms of the Lincoln domain and the review that we need to do into where we're going in the direction of travel for our strategies, that cost be removed at this time, pending some further information and a better informed view that is relative to the whole district when we come back to the next LTP. So it is currently in the budget, and we're proposing to remove it from the budget. And this, to the same token, there is a proposal for Lincoln Event Centre, a refurbishment with retaining the same footprint. That's also going to make it meet the requirements of a second civil defence building, etc., as I spoke about. Given the fiscal constraints that council is currently facing, we are proposing that that could be withdrawn from the budget and or part of the consultation in terms of what goes out to the community, so that the community understands the cost and the cost implications of retaining either or both in the long-term plan in its budget.
Okay, because I understand that these projects are also, or not so much LEC, but the Prebbleton and or an opportunity to build a purpose-built and lease building somewhere on the Lincoln domain. And as I've highlighted, that's the first time I've heard of that particular one ever being mentioned. It's never been a submission to the LTP process. So I just questioned about where that was coming from, but that's for this afternoon. But I'm just conscious that also in the report this afternoon, if you look at Prebbleton, they've only got the cottage for meetings, and that is accessibly used very high, and you're relying on a volunteer group within the community to actually fill that void. And I'm just conscious of the fact that you know, that model may have to be looked at what the void is filling that gap at the end, because we're actually relying on volunteers, and they've got increased pressure with regards to the usage of that building. So I just want to clarify, and the growth expected in Prebbleton, you know, you need something that's walkability, and that's why, you know, I just want all of these matters considered. But if you're going to take it out of this LTP when it's sitting there currently, I think you probably need to have something in the LTP explaining to the community its removal.
And Thank you, Deborah. And again, this is the direction and guidance that we're seeking to be able to bring the next iteration through in the workshop, as they can be left in there with some narrative and you can receive feedback from the community. What we want to make sure is that the community understand the cost associated, and for councillors to understand the cost associated, which is what you've seen in the current raw budget that we've put up, is that they are there, and here is the cost associated with it as it stands at the moment.
Just with regards to the DC funds at 4125, that's currently the DC funds sitting alongside this project. That's not the potential for the collected DC funds from all the growth that's going to happen within Prebbleton.
Is that a question? Deborah, are you asking that or you're telling us?
No, it's a question, sorry, just for clarification.
We'll have to come back and give you that answer, so I don't think anyone can give that answer now.
Okay, Shane.
Kia ora, Sam. I guess just working backwards, thank you very much. The digital investment of 1 million suggested that it be for a review over the next 3 years. So you're suggesting that the current systems are adequate, and does that? Oh, I guess it's a review. I had a question around OPEX and insurance. So yeah, so the $1 million is requested for review. Suggests that current system is adequate?
No, we're not suggesting the current system is adequate. What we're saying is that we don't have sufficient information and a roadmap to know what it is we need as an organisation, and what we're seeking is some investment to help explore, so we can bring back some options to councillors to say this is fit for purpose. And those options may include that we tag into the back of another council who've got pieces of work underway. At the moment, we don't have sufficient information to give us a good roadmap, and we don't understand the quantum of dollars that would be required. So what we're asking for is support to do that piece of work.
Yeah, and I would. It was just a bit of a gap there in between what we had been told up to this point. Where was that? The water fluoride, the 7.9. You said that had been included and budgeted for. So there's opportunity for that to be reallocated rather than pools.
Yep, to be reallocated, but more likely just to be removed, and that will reduce the burden on rates.
Yep. I just guess regarding the community facilities and big decisions, Denise, you spoke about major facilities being more accountable alongside property infrastructure. Is that correct? So will there be a working partnership, or will there be a hierarchy where through the process that would happen? That's sort of one question. And then I guess the last long-term plan, there was 8 big decisions. And of those 8 big decisions, maybe 3 have been executed. That would be the development of waste water, Kirwi Darfield, potentially Horata, and maybe one other. Can't really read my writing now. But what we continue to be committed to is water and delivery of our core services, which is good. So I guess what would be good is that the natural cascade of what then the gaps that open, not the gaps that open up, but the projects that have been completed, and then the priority of what takes place next. And you've mentioned the ins and outs and the recommendations around the ins and outs. I'm keen to hear from those from councillors from that area, but I think that's for me what's that lacking, that cascading order and natural justice of what's priority. I'm happy with the options Waihora Whataro around that. I'm quite confident you've captured the conversation that happened at our last meeting. Yeah, that's all I have, I think. Thank you so much.
I'll respond to the first question, and Sharon might want to say something as well. I guess what I'm signalling is that a very different approach to how we plan for future public-facing facilities, and a whole lot of other changes as well, and that's going to be an all of ELT view that's taken. And though the group that will be charged with the operation of such facilities will be as integrally part of the planning as the property team has been to date. And that's a direction that's been set by our incoming chief executive, and that's the direction of travel. Sharon, did you want to comment on that?
Yeah, thank you. And really that shift is about, one, breaking down silos, two, making sure that decisions aren't made in isolation, and three, when we're building, not only are we considering the capital cost, but actually what the operational cost is associated, so that we don't find ourselves with a set of legacy issues. So it is a fundamental change to how we have been operating to how we're intending to operate into the future.
Thanks, Shane. Phil.
I got three questions. The first one is that slide there. It says $9.4 million for further investigation into early design. It's a lot of money, 9.4 million.
Yes, it is.
Okay, right. The question.
Seriously though, I suppose it is a staged process over a number of years, and so at any point we find out this is no longer feasible, then we'll stop. So, for example, this financial year and next, we're drilling a number of exploratory wells, so that's a relatively small cost, couple of $100,000, and if we find that the water actually is not what we hoped it to be, then the project stops at that point. So, I suppose there's sort of a guarantee or commitment from us as staff that we're not going to progress if there's no future outcome for it.
So it is that, okay? It's just a big number. The cycleway connection. How's that connected to the blue-green project that we saw a little while ago, and also to our tourism partners? I love the idea of the cycleway, but the connection to our tourism partners in the blue-green, I guess is the question.
Sorry, Phil, can you just repeat that?
Yeah, sure. So the cycleways from across from the Alps to Ocean, for like a better name. A little while ago, someone spoke about the blue-green project that's happening at the moment. Is there a connection between those two? And also, what about the connection to our other tourism partners? That cost that's been put up there, is that our cost with our partners, or is that cost without the partners, or?
Yeah, no, thanks for those questions. Certainly we see that connectivity across the plains between, for instance, Springfield and Kirwee as being the pivotal corridor that we can sort of consolidate around in terms of providing both the cycling connection, but also opportunities around blue-green, biodiversity, all those type of things. So we see this as just not purely a cycleway. We see this as I'll call it a little bit more of a transformational corridor that connects all those townships together. And so we would certainly bring in all those elements. In terms of your other question around those costs, those are just purely costs that we think of that would be needed to construct those sections of those cycleways. They don't include any other contributions or things like that. But that goes to the point around, as you see in the slide there, about advocation and the fact that council instead could support trusts to develop and promote these cycleways, which then can actually have more of an opportunity to bring in those type of elements and secure sources of funding that we can't as a council ourselves.
Obviously tourism is as much about our neighbours as it is about us. So yeah, there's some funny there. But the last one is around the people budget. You talked about repurposing existing vacancies. Maybe all the staff might start throwing things at me shortly, but what about restructuring existing personnel into places where they're needed? I mean, obviously that's an ongoing piece of work.
So restructuring is an evil word.
It is. That's why I'm looking at you, not me.
Yes, that's absolutely. And I'm not a fan of restructure. We've seen the challenge that restructuring has brought in terms of loss of intellectual knowledge and property within the organisation. I'm more of an evolution as opposed to revolution. And in terms of the repurposing, the decisions around the repurposing has been made of understanding what our operating models are, because that's not been well understood. So in terms of we are evolving, understanding what our operating models are and what the priorities are, and that's where the decisions have been made around repurposing.
I guess what my question was more around is that as we move through the world into a greater world with the digital investment, there are things that we currently have that we're not going to need. And that doesn't appear to be taken into the equation. Sure, the vacancies have been repurposed, and I get why you've done that. That makes perfect sense.
So we are not in the position at the moment because we are not digital savvy and we're not in a digital era. As we develop the roadmap and as we understand and we get the investment, there will be a point in the future, and I talk about the future being the next 5 to maybe 8 years, where there will be a crossover as we start to get digital efficiencies, and that may well allow in say 5 years' time for us to be able to shift what our FTE looks like. But certainly at this stage, we are nowhere near that.
And I guess to add to that too is as we find central government having the same thing with increasing their digital, there could be some benefits that we get in that space too. So it's not something we can lose our focus on, I guess.
No, and we may find as we go through developing the roadmap, whilst we gain efficiencies, let's say in customer service or whatever, it may not equate to a large amount of FTE either, because, you know, Selwyn is making a transition from a small, medium-sized council, and this is part of our challenge, into the fastest growing TA. So let's not assume that automatically we're going to start reducing FTE numbers, because actually that may not be the case and it may be a false economy.
Just the final comment on that people budgeting thing I mentioned out there is that there was a budget, it was an item up there saying...
Could you put those slides up, please, Jen?
It was an investment. One of them was talking about how there was an investment that hadn't been budgeted for. Here we go, that one there. One role for consultant spend not originally budgeted for in OPEX. If it wasn't budgeted for an OPEX, then we can't really claim it back as a clawback, can we?
Correct, and that's actually why it's gone in as a net cost to the. So, in the other lines, we've actually reduced where there is true saving. You'll see in that net cost column that the cost is reduced from the total cost. And in that particular line, the cost has carried all the way through.
My apologies, I read it the wrong way around.
That's all right.
Wasn't an easy slide to read. We acknowledge that.
Thanks, Phil. Malcolm.
Yeah, low nitrate water. We're shareholders in CPW, and it looks like we're going to spend $9.4 million drilling wells. Is there any thought into whether we could use CPW water and treat it for potable water?
Can I just note that we have the chair of CPW in the room, and I just don't want to cause conflict for you, Grant, in this conversation. So just that's
a conflict.
Noted and understood. Yeah. Great.
No, that is part of our investigations, and so we are in talks with CPW and their chief executive.
Oh, thank you, Murray. The other thing, of course, which I have to bring up as a Prebbleton resident, is my community have only been waiting for a new hall for 9 years.
Oh, that's right.
We got pushed out by Wharaora, which went from 7 million to 19, which is surely going to be dead in the water. I'm very concerned that we would take it completely out of the LTP. I'm quite happy to see it pushed back in the LTP once again, because I'm a firm believer that we need to build for what we've got. That community is about to expand in a major way with the amount of consented housing that's coming on stream, and I'd much rather see whatever the community ends up with being fit for purpose than being too small once it's built. There is some assumptions that something can be on the main street and that is clearly not available. The community has to get their head around that. There's nowhere in the centre of the town to put such a structure. The centre of the town the town is actually moving as well. So there are many things coming out of the ether as to allowing us to make a better decision on a building in the future. So I think taking it out completely is a bit drastic, but I can't see pushing it back is probably a very good idea. And I would hope that the DC fundings that are sitting around it stay within that community for whatever they build in the future.
Thanks, Malcolm. Lydia.
I have a couple. So Murray, since the low nitrate water, what communities is this proposed for?
So it'll be rolled out in a staged process if it was to go ahead. But the main Greater Christchurch communities of West Melton and Edendale, which is right next door, Rolleston, Prempleton, Lincoln. But there's also part of this proposal is to pipe water up to Darfield, where we have nitrates around half the MAV and sometimes over. And then from Darfield out to some of our rural suppliers like Haurata, Malvern Hills. So it is quite a district-wide community. It wouldn't service places like Leaston, Southbridge, Dalston, and likewise it wouldn't service Castle Hill and Arthur's Pass, but no, it would have quite a wide extent.
Thank you. And the external funding sources to fund staff, I was wondering what are those and how likely are they to be funded in the long term?
It's quite a raft of different ways of funding those. So some of those include a reduction of consultants' costs, that's what we talked about earlier on. There's trade waste permits and consents that we will be generating income from. Part of the district plan review is the necessity to provide flood level assessments for new building floor levels, and recuperating costs for those is a large part for a couple of those staff. So those are a number of examples. Recovering a cost for providing advice to developers, to homeowners, those sort of things.
So just to feed into that, one of the areas that we've had a focus on is where's the revenue opportunities that we're missing. And I'm really proud of my ELT and my tier 3s and 4s who have actually brought forward areas that council hasn't currently been charging for that should be charging for. And in terms of, we wouldn't have the FTE that we've saying could be funded from another revenue, we are confident in those sources that they could be, and they're not necessarily related to central government or central government policy.
Thank you. That gives good clarification on that.
And just, I'll kind of go back to, if you don't mind, Jen, go right back to the revenue, and this is a really important point. Sorry that I do just want to reiterate. When we talk about the revenue and the new opportunities, so just to be really clear that some of these new opportunities are not yet factored into the budget. So obviously we had the community infrastructure DC conversation last week or the week before. We've got some investment and divestment opportunities, and what I mean by that is we've got a large commercial portfolio, and we're busy doing a stock take of that at the moment, because actually we don't know what the opportunities exist within there. And so what I'm hoping is that by the time we get early into the new year, we're actually able to share that information with councillors, because you may wish to seek some opportunities to maybe sell a particular piece of land or whatever to contribute or not, or invest it in a different way. And again, there are areas that we haven't been charging commercial rates for in terms of limbs and lagoimas. And again, we really need to bring ourselves up to speed. This year, we reviewed all fees and charges collectively together as an organisation, rather than doing it in silos. And to give you a bit of a feel, is that fees and charges have not necessarily risen in line with the CPI. And so some fees and charges that you would expect to keep pace with inflation have not risen for 5 or 6 years. And so what we're applying for outgoing years now is making sure that we actually keep pace with the cost of inflation and increases. So, it's a really quite a good thorough bit of work. Bulk water extraction is another key. We are probably one of the only councils that are not charging for bulk water extraction, which seems, quite ridiculous. So, we look forward to actually being able to bring those in and incorporate that into some of the thinking to help further refine the financial data.
Can I continue? And I guess it'll be no surprise to you, I just would like some clarification around the Sheffield pool. And so what is the consultation option here? Because to me it is just close. And you said in the presentation that council has decided to close the pool. So I guess I'm wondering, for continuity, to talk to my community, will any alternative options be considered? And if not, then what is the point in consulting on this?
Well, I guess there's a statutory requirement to consult in terms of significant assets. So that's where the decision to consult is anchored from, I guess it's not a million miles away from the earlier conversation around chlorination. We have a view, that view may, in terms of the council team, that view may or may not be shared by council and councillors, and that is their prerogative. And there are things that councillors will decide to go out and consult on. We are required to consult because of this, the legislation or the policy around it, but I think it would be misleading to suggest that we don't have already a position that says the intent is to close it. But that doesn't mean that if there was overwhelming support from the broader Selwyn district that says no, keep it, that council wouldn't be prepared to revisit it. It's just not a direction. We just have to make choices about whether we keep things in budget or whether we take them out. But the whole LTP process allows for movement. Things can then get taken out, things can get added in.
And if I can just add to that, for the process that we're going through is to come up with a draft plan, and what we're consulting on is that whole plan across 10 years with some serious focus on 3 years. And although we'll receive feedback and we're going to highlight some individual projects, the consultation is on the plan as a whole, and we'll receive and we'll make decisions in the end on the plan as a whole by working through different aspects of it.
Cool. And with the cycleway, is there any ongoing costs that are considered into the cycleway, some maintenance and whatnot? Yeah, sorry.
That's all right. That's a good question. No, they're purely capital costs, and you've identified a real issue in regards to if we do go down this track in terms of establishing these cycleways, particularly the section down from the Alps to the plains will be very high maintenance. Yep. And so that would fall into more of our reserves funding area, whereas we could possibly make the argument to the NZTA that possibly the maintenance and operations for the section between the Melbourne townships could potentially become a transport funded option, but that's a long way to have those discussions yet.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks, Lydia. Grant.
If we can start at the start, I guess, around staff requests for FTEs. First of all, masterful piece of communication. Starting off at 44 FTEs and coming back to 13, I thought that was masterful. Because all of a sudden we think,
thank you.
Great. I didn't buy it though, but I thought it was masterful. What concerned me, I suppose, was seeing the number up there about the previous restructure of $8 million increase cost when the previous restructure was purported to drive efficiencies and productivity increases. So you're talking about, and just correct me if I'm wrong, Sharon, that we've increased our staff spend by $8 million for the previous restructure, and now we're talking about adding further FTEs on top of that again. Is that
so? Just to clarify, and I will look to Alison, and if somebody could give her a speaker so she could add in. It isn't necessarily about FTE. It is about when the restructure took place, the actual operational costs were not necessarily understood. So whilst people may have been put in, and that might have been cost neutral, actually there was no operational cost put in around the service that they were then going to provide, or car usage, or all of those aspects. So that all basically adds up at the end of the day, which is where that sum has come from. And Alison, do you want to be a bit more specific?
Yeah, I think just adding to that as well, when the organisational restructure was drafted, an assumption was made on salary levels. Some of those salary levels came in a lot higher than expected, just keeping up with the market. And to add to that, the digital kit that a person requires when they start as well, that possibly wasn't included.
So all of those things do add up to somewhere in the region of $8 million. And what Lisa has presented would be a cost over and above that as well.
So obviously I'm elected here as a representative of the ratepayers. This is the thing that ratepayers hate, of course. So they want ultimate justification that any FTE added adds to the services delivered and the efficiency of the council. And I guess that's again directed at you, Sharon, is that I'm not averse to more FTEs being taken on with the council, but I would like every FTE to be absolutely scrutinised to being deliver further services to our ratepayer base, and assessing that there's no productivity within the organisation which can be further enhanced or utilised. It's just underutilised before we take on a further FTE.
So that was the risk profile that we undertook and the risk lens that was applied over the top. That risk lens will be utilised going forward. I would just remind councillors too, to be fair, that this is a growing council and it was starting from a low base as well, and that's really important in terms of we've seen the exponential growth and the impact. There's also related to legislation and reform. So certainly I would say the FTE was warranted. What was not well understood was the market rate, and as a council, we're probably in one of the lowest quartile of payers. As we go out into the market and we're competing, we're having to compete at a much higher level. So these are all of the things that's being quantified. In terms of productivity, I'm very clear as incoming CEO about ensuring that we are as productive as we can be. We have a fine balance at the moment in terms of our digital capabilities does not allow us to be as efficient as we would like, which possibly then means that we do have more people to undertake things. But however, as we understand our digital requirements and what is needed, we're going to continue to grow. We've seen the trajectory. We know what that looks like. So we can't necessarily say that that will equate into a reduction, but I'm very conscious around the operational budget and in terms of how we monitor ourselves.
I would compare us to a service industry like finance industry or the insurance industry, which has seen wholesale staff reductions with increased productivity through use of digital technology and AI, and that would be where we were heading, you would have to say. And it's not a maybe as you're saying, it's not here now, but we would be seeking that as a governance group from our ratepayers.
And that was my comment before about that's where I expect us to be in the next 5 years. We've got to understand what is needed, then we've got to be able to fund it. And let's be clear that even if we link into another council organisation, we're still talking about an investment roughly of tens of millions of dollars. So we will have that transition period, and it will require significant funding once we understand, our councillors give us guidance and direction on what the digital options that we put forward eventually at the next LTP.
I'll carry on, but I think the underlying theme which I'm trying to talk about too is, and I'm not sure how to reflect it in the LTP, is for our ratepayers to be able to assess the level of service that they are comfortable with taking, because as a council with our growth, we have significantly increased our level of service from being a rural-based council with largely volunteer-based organisations to an all-paid, particularly you think of transition to community facilities, particularly, which has significantly increased the cost. So that's the theme underlying it. But roading. $16 million, I think I saw as this year's capex, 50 million next year, and I think 50 million sort of trending right through to 70 million, I think was sort of the underlying theme I was seeing. Roading, actual 16 million, then the next year's 56, 15, 36, 50, 50, 50. Significant step change in requirement in roading, which probably we can understand as drivers. It is a step change, isn't it? Basically, it's double, triple the budget.
In simple terms, that's right. In terms of where we were at in 2021 for the current LTP to where we are now with the draft LTP, essentially our CapEx program has doubled. in terms of projected over the next 10 plus years. The reason is that unlike last time, we're now having to deal with the issues and the outcomes from those 18 to 20 private plan changes, and all the growth-related aspects associated with that, and all the traffic upgrades, all the roading and transport upgrades associated with that. We're under increasing pressure with our increased traffic growth around the safety, around our network, particularly our townships, Rolleston in particular, Lincoln also, and Prebbleton. And as you can already know, we've been working hard on that Prebbleton solution over the last a number of years now, with a little bit more to go. And certainly, it's I would say the whole CapEx program is quite heavily interdependent and intertwined, in terms of the fact that we are having to undertake upgrades ourselves in terms of fully funding those, and we're also needing and trying to coordinate with being able to get funding from NZTA around those. So as an example, the Ellesmere Road arterial upgrade, which we've been talking about for a long time, that is a combination of our own funding in terms of the widening component, but we are trying to seek the funding for the intersection safety upgrades through NZTA and the low-cost, low-risk program. So what I can say is, as I said before, it is heavily intertwined, and it's not only the increase in the number of potential projects, it's also the cost of them. And that is the biggest problem that we're facing going forward, is the impact of managing the impact of the recent cost escalations and inflation problems that have occurred over the last couple of years, and that is really having a large reflection in our program. So it's more, yes, we need to do more, but it's also costing a lot more.
Speaking on behalf of, I suppose, the existing community of Selwyn, the question I get asked quite frequently is the growth community contributing enough? Are we collecting enough through the growth community to facilitate this? Are we getting every single dollar out of the growth community that we should be?
As we talked about the other week, in terms of our draft development contribution policy, we have legislative limits to what we can do in terms of applying development contributions, and that is to the growth component of our, and I'll use the example, transport projects. And so, yes, we have maximised as much as we can in terms of that revenue source, in terms of identifying the specific element associated with growth and targeting the DCs on that.
Terrible job you got to do, Andrew. You do it well. Thank you. Moving on to the community facilities, I was really concerned to see these, I guess. And Malcolm sort of has it in the header. I guess that's not the slide.
Slide 10,
yeah,
is it?
I suppose that might be part of it. That one there,
Yeah, 10.
Where do we start? I suppose let's start with Rolleston Community Centre. So we want improvements for the same value. We build a new building in Prebbleton. Must be great improvements we're going to put to existing building. And Southwest Rolleston, we're going to build a new build. Well, we've got almost 5 or 6 brand new schools in Rolleston. Shouldn't we be partnering with schools? It's a taxpayer, it's a public asset. Why would we build a whole lot of new community centres in Rolleston when we've got brand new school buildings? It seems like there's an opportunity there to scratch that off the list. Prebbleton, so let's just be a bit parochial here and go, why on earth have we got a 2-court indoor stadium in Darfield being promoted to be developed in years 1 to 3 of the LTP when it's come from nowhere? There's nobody knocking the door down saying we're desperate for facilities in Darfield. It's a very small town. It's got some growth potential with sewage coming on board. We've got a wonderful recreation centre. We've got a wonderful high school which provide existing facilities. And I'm going, where does this project come from? Why is it even on the list? Because it's got no support from my point of view anywhere. It's just it's a figment. I haven't seen the GLG report which supports it. And so I'm sort of going, well, scratch off that, scratch off Southwest Rolleston. I'm happy with Malcolm. I'm not happy, but I can see the logic in deferring Preobleton until Kakaha Park investigations are concluded, but I support retaining the budget within the LTP. And the LEC improvements, well, as yet I haven't seen what they are or what they look like, so I can't comment on that. But so that's a synopsis on those things. IT, the line holder of $1 million a year, can't we employ a full one FTE IT professional for 250? Where's the other 750 going to go?
And that's what we were referencing. So we've identified that there are probably about 260 projects that have been sitting in the background that may offer some efficiencies. And we can see that probably some of those are quick wins. So it's about some funding to enable those to help us gain some efficiencies. So it's about giving ourselves some flexibility to get on and do and make a difference, but understanding that whatever we do would have to fit into part of the bigger picture. So we want to be quite thoughtful and make sure that whatever we would set up could be integrated into a wider system in the future. And it may well be that some of the projects that we would want to implement, we accept that they're going to be short-term implementation for gains until we actually understand what the wider system is. At the moment, we are simply sitting there with quite a dearth in digital technology in space. So we're trying to give ourselves a bit of flexibility.
So I'll finish off. I mean, somewhere in the other, I think we've got to have level of service aspirations for our ratepayers to be able to reply to. And, you know, I think a lot of these things we're creating a rod for our own back, and I would like to see us sweating the asset.
Are you talking about sweating the people or sweating the digital environment?
The assets, including buildings like school buildings versus community centres, making sure, absolutely certain, there's no productivity gains within the organisation before further FTE.
Sorry, just your microphone, Grant.
But, you know, I don't want to talk getting close to time and other people speak.
I get your point.
If I could just respond to a couple of the questions raised in terms of where that new Southwest Rolleston came from, was that it was originally in that 2021 facilities network plan that was presented to council. What we are proposing is that when it comes to the planning for that Southwest Rolleston facility, it must be done in conjunction with the existing Rolleston Community Centre to consider whether or not both or either are needed, and whether or not the current location of Rolleston Community Centre is the best location for that future growth, etc. But if it is the view of council that the cost that is proposed for that new facility at Southwest Rolleston be removed at this point, that is entirely appropriate. I guess from an RCC point of view, there was a report that came to you previously to council that said actually it was planned for a massive refurbishment significantly sooner, and we think that actually it can limp on with some minor adjustments before any major investment is required. You'll recall it originally was going to be repurposed into an arts and
There's a lot of history, Denise. It was going to be 86 completely when we built a TRRT, so it's limped on magnificently.
Yeah, I guess we did have active conversations with the Rolleston College in terms of their second campus and whether or not there was an opportunity to do some sharing, and there were some limitations to that conversation. But I can assure you that part of the work that will take place around both of those will include conversations with schools, but also with developers as well in that regard. Just in terms of, Preobleton, that's your point is noted, and I just was going to give a chance for James if he had anything to say about where the sports centre has come from, but my understanding was that when there was an investigation into the feasibility and needs associated with aquatics and general recreation facilities, the feedback was there hasn't been sufficient growth and demand demonstrated at this point to justify investment in a swimming pool for the Darfield area, but there certainly is a level of demand and a relative lack in terms of sports facilities, and a lot of that was echoed, I guess, by the school, who have some constraints in that regard.
Two sentence require. How can there be demand in Darfield for a 2-court indoor stadium, but not in Leaston, the same community of the same size?
James can talk, he knows the report more detail.
Yeah, so the report looked at drive time analysis as a key driver of what would where indoor court should be located. Prebbleton has access to a 10-court facility now in Naipunawai, and also the Selwyn Sports Centre. The drive time from Darfield to the nearest indoor court is at least 25 minutes. So that's the bottom line. That's fine.
Thanks, James, for that clarity. Nicole.
So are we talking about the keeping our community informed slides as well?
I thought we'd kind of run out of time, but they will be there for feedback, whether it be offline. But please, if it's a burning question, yes.
No, it is, because the compulsory organics cost, which is quite a change from what we've got. We currently have an opt-in food and garden curbside organics service. We personally, as a family, don't go for that. We compost our own. If we're talking about climate change issues, that's actually the better way that should be dealt with. But I see here that we are looking to expect people to pay $190 a year from 2027 for having that service.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, look, it's a central government amendment to the Waste Minimisation Act that we really don't. But to implement, it's something that we don't really have any option other than to implement. The only townships that are affected are those of Darfield, Leaston, Lincoln, Prebbleton, Rolleston, and West Melton. They meet the criteria that are specified in the amendment. I do personally favour the opt-ins. I do personally favour the opt-in service, but that's what's been indicated by central government as what will be a compulsory service. 45 to 68% of those households already do take up the opt-in service. It's just that the bins will be effectively forced on those who don't currently have it.
Because what you've got written here is that councils are to provide food scrap service, as opposed to saying that the people that are in the area have to take up that service. There is a difference.
Yes, and it's good point, well noticed. It's something that we raised with the ministry, and we sought clarity on, and they took a little while to come back and confirm that. It's not 100% set in stone, but the recommendation from ministry staff to the minister, who will make the final call on it, is that the service is non-optional, compulsory. So whether the new minister takes the staff advice to run with that is yet to be seen, but we're reading that at this stage, that's what we expect.
Okay, well, to me it doesn't make sense, but to change from what we've got. But anyway, moving on, can I go to the slide 10? So it's the community services, the community centres one again. Just want some clarification around these DCs collected. So we're not currently rating for community centres. So how have we got, where's the DCs come from? I assume the first dot on the first point on each of those are DCs that have already been collected. And since we're not collecting for community centres, I guess that's will be collected before the buildings are built. Just, yeah, I don't properly understand what's.
I'll just defer to Thomas and Alison, but I understand there is a proposal in the earlier slide that proposes a DC to gather development contributions specifically for community facilities.
Yeah, so it's future funds we collected. So if you look at the first one, Prebilton, 51.4%. So those numbers match up
So
to the one above.
So I was right at clarification that none of those DC funds currently exist that we're talking about now, that are up there now.
That's our understanding. Yep, we'll clarify that, but that's our understanding.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, with the sports centre and the pool in Darfield, has there been any allowance for funding for extra land to actually put these buildings in a better position possibly than on our own land? So has there been anything so that we could catch up with Lincoln and the land that they've got extra?
My understanding is that the proposal is that it's on council land, that the land that council owns. There is a separate process that goes around looking for opportunities to invest in property and purchase property. So I'd defer to my colleague from Property and Infrastructure about whether there is land purchases scheduled that we're not aware of. Annette, do you want to come forward?
Annette, it's easier to come forward and talk, please.
Sorry, just apologise as Mark has COVID. It isn't here, who you'd normally speak to. So I think you'd be aware that a number of years ago that there was a large extension purchased at Darfield for future development opportunities. So that's in that particular area. That's why we, at the moment, that site is deemed of an appropriate site. But there is some in the first 1 to 3 years of the LTP, there's some future strategy work to review the community centres and halls and network plan and the aquatics network plan or provision plan. So that would then also highlight the opportunity if any future land purchase or additional land purchase was required. Thank you.
Thanks, Bob. Sophie.
Yeah, I had a bunch of questions, but I can see we're well over time, so I will just talk to people for the most part. But one thing I did want to ask was, it was back on the community information part. I seem to recall after our last LTP, we had some constructive criticism from the Office of the Auditor General that we didn't include enough information about what we were actually doing in terms of actions for climate change. And it would be really good to have something a bit more structured than just we've signed an agreement 6 years ago, but this is the thing, very little clearly detailing what we're actually doing about it. Thank you.
Thanks, Sophie. Elizabeth?
Yeah, I'll just be quick as well. I just want to point out that obviously a lot of what we're hopefully looking at here is shaving costs for our ratepayers because things are tight. And I mean, if anyone's following the news, you'll know in Australia they've got a huge amount of increased homelessness and tent cities getting set up at the moment. And I'd hate for us to end up in that sort of position where we're forcing people out of their properties because of the unaffordability. Looking at the economic development strategy, is there any areas here that could be shaved off in times of hardship? Looking at a business hub, is that within our jurisdiction? Dark sky accreditation, it's a nice to have, but is it a necessity in hard times? Large scale visitor attraction events. Just want to know if there's anything on that list that could potentially be pushed back.
Councillors will be aware that the economic development strategy is currently being developed. So what you see in front of you are some indicative projects, but they have to be well tested, and there has to be a lot further engagement with the business sector and etc. around that. So they are not necessarily detailed costs that have been determined, but they are indicative of the type of costs, because we think it would be it's wrong to have no costs, have no description of the types of activities that might sit within that, but the timing doesn't allow us to have the specifics in it. So this was considered a a halfway place, an indication of some of the areas where some of the preliminary consultation has indicated there might be some interest and that there might be some economic benefits to the district as a whole in in pursuing some of that, and whether or not council is the sole contributor to the resourcing, etc., is still water under the bridge. Claire, did you want to add anything to that? Is that right?
Great. Thank you, everyone, for the contributions today. Staff for all the background work over the last many months to be able to get to this discussion. Staff will take away the comments that have been shared here and frame up something for the new year. You'll see a diary invite on the 24th of January appear in your diary to have the next part of this conversation, which currently doesn't sit there. There is one for the 31st of January, but we're going to need that extra time, so just expect that. And yeah, thank you for your consideration. There's obviously some things that you might also want to continue to discuss with the relevant ELT members or Sharon around things that have been presented today. So as Sophie said, please take the opportunity to clarify any questions that you didn't have a chance to discuss. Sharon, anything you want to finish with?
I just want to say thank you for your time. Thank you to all the staff involved and those present here today. I know this has been a huge piece of work, and we understand and appreciate the challenges that we've presented today and for the LTP going forward. And it is challenging as a council that is continuing to grow with a variety of other pressures in terms of inflationary, etc.
Thank you. We'll close the workshop and council meeting begins at 1 p.m. Thanks.